I've lived alone in this old house on the outskirts of a sleepy town for years now. It's one of those places where the streets empty out just after sunset, leaving a stillness that's both comforting and, at the same time, unnerving. My house, nestled among towering oaks, has always been my sanctuary. That night, the one that changed everything, was a typical autumn evening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I'd spent the day working in my home office, the monotony broken only by the occasional car passing by. Evening brought a sense of relief as I shut down my computer, made a simple meal, and settled in front of the TV. By 10 p.m, I was ready to turn in, looking forward to the comfort of my bed. Sleep came easily, but it was a restless, fitful slumber. I tossed and turned, plagued by vague, unsettling dreams. And then, abruptly, I awoke. The time was 3:30 a.m, according to the glowing red digits on my bedside clock. The house was silent, the kind of deep, enveloping quiet that almost feels heavy. But then, I heard it. A faint creak, as if someone were walking very slowly and carefully down the hallway, right outside my bedroom. My heart began to race, each beat echoing loudly in my ears. The sound was out of place, disturbing the usual nighttime stillness of my home. At first, I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, or perhaps the house settling. But the creaks continued, becoming more distinct, more purposeful. Someone was in my house, moving stealthily towards my bedroom. The idea was ludicrous. My house was securely locked, and my neighborhood was known for its safety. Yet, the undeniable sound of footsteps crept ever closer. Panic set in. I sat up, straining to listen, half expecting the door to just burst open. But it never did. Instead, the footsteps stopped, right outside my bedroom. The ensuing silence was almost worse than the sounds. It felt like the intruder was just standing there, waiting. I barely breathed as I called out a timid, "Hello?" into the darkness. The silence answered back. With trembling hands, I quietly moved my dresser to barricade the door. I peered through the keyhole, but the hallway was bathed in darkness, revealing nothing. When morning light finally seeped through my curtains, I braved a look outside. The house was quiet, unchanged. The police found no evidence of an intrusion, but sleep didn't come easy after that. I spent the nights listening, waiting, but the footsteps didn't return. That is, not until a week later. That second night, the sense of dread was overwhelming. The footsteps were back, echoing in the hallway like a slow, rhythmic drum of doom. This time, I was determined to confront whatever it was. I reached for the door handle, but then I heard it. A sharp intake of breath from the other side. A chill ran down my spine. It was waiting for me to open the door. The next day, I couldn't bear the thought of another night in that house. I checked into a nearby hotel, a nondescript place that promised the anonymity and safety that I craved. My room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the quiet street. The mundane sounds of the hotel, distant conversations, the ding of the elevator, were oddly comforting. But as night fell, my anxiety returned. I lay in bed, jumping at every sound from the hallway. Eventually, hunger compelled me toward a room service, a decision I would soon sorely regret. The horror unfolded quickly. Footsteps, not in the hallway this time, but inside my room. They moved with a calm certainty towards the bathroom where I was hiding. The sliding door offered no protection, no lock. I was trapped, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard. A knock at the hotel room door signaled the arrival of my meal. I wanted to shout a warning, to tell the unsuspecting staff member to run, but fear held me silent. The door opened and the nightmare escalated. From my hiding spot, I heard a struggle, then a blood-curdling scream. The sounds that followed were grotesque, the wet tearing of flesh, bones snapping. The employees' moans were agonizing. filled with terror and excruciating pain. It was a slow, torturous end. His laboured breathing was punctuated by gurgles as blood filled his lungs. I could hear the sickening sound of his limbs being torn off, the relentless ripping and gnashing. I cowered in the bathroom, overwhelmed by guilt and terror, listening to the employees' final, desperate breaths. The silence that followed was haunting, worse even than the violence. When the police arrived, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. The hotel room was a tableau of horror. Blood was spattered across the walls and floor, painting a gruesome picture. The remains of the hotel employee were scattered haphazardly, a testament to the savage brutality of the attack. His limbs were torn, his body mutilated beyond recognition. The sight was so horrific, so visceral, that I could barely comprehend it. The officers' faces mirrored my shock, their eyes wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. They questioned me, their voices seeming distant, as if I were hearing them from underwater. I recounted the events, my words feeling inadequate to convey the terror of the experience. They took notes, their expressions growing grimmer with each detail. But there was no evidence, no sign of forced entry, nothing to explain the violence that had unfolded. After giving my statement, I was moved to another room, but sleep was an impossible dream. The images of the attack replayed in my mind, unbidden and unrelenting. Every shadow now seemed to hide a lurking danger, every sound a potential threat. The night stretched on, endless and oppressive. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel, the eyes of the staff following me with a mix of curiosity and fear. I wandered the streets aimlessly, unsure of where to go or what to do. The city, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and threatening. I found myself standing outside of my house, the scene of the first encounter. It looked the same, yet it felt irrevocably altered. The memories of what had happened within those walls filled me with dread, but I had nowhere else to go. I spent the days that followed in a haze of fear and confusion. Night brought little relief, as every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. I slept in fits and starts, the slightest noise jolting me awake. The footsteps never returned, but the fear they instilled remained, a constant companion in the once peaceful solitude of my home. I began to avoid the dark, leaving lights on throughout the night. Shadows seemed to move just at the edge of my vision, and I often found myself staring into corners, certain that something was watching me. The days blurred into one another, each as tense and fraught with anxiety as the last. The police investigation turned up nothing. No suspects, no leads, nothing to explain the violence at the hotel or the intrusions in my home. They suggested I see a therapist, implied it might all be in my head, but I knew what I had heard, what I had seen. Now, I live in a state of constant vigilance. The world outside feels hostile, full of unseen dangers. My home, once a haven, now feels like a prison. I jump at every sound, every shadow. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and filled with nightmares. I've started looking into selling the house, thinking that maybe a new start somewhere else might help. But deep down, I know it's futile. The fear has burrowed deep inside of me, a part of who I am now. Sometimes I wonder if the footsteps will return, if I'll hear that slow, deliberate tread in the hallway again. But mostly, I try not to think about it, to lose myself in the mundane tasks of daily life. In the end, I've learned a hard lesson. Sometimes there are no answers, no explanations. Some horrors are beyond understanding, beyond reason. All we can do is endure, find a way to live with the fear and uncertainty. And so I carry on, one day at a time, clinging to the hope that one day the terror will fade and I'll find peace again. But until then, I listen and I wait.